No one's riding to save you. It would cost him everything. That sentence, that doorway, that certainty. He did not know that her husband was the most feared gunslinger alive in the New Mexico territory. He did not know that the woman standing before him had been dropping coyotes by starlight at 200 yards since she was 10. He had done his research on the man. He had never done his research on the wife. That oversight was going to cost him considerably. Her name was Nora Calloway, Nora Fenn before she married, and before that she was a Fenn of the Pecos country, and the Fenns did not raise soft daughters. She was 24 years old that spring of 1887, down in the high scrub south of Santa Fe, on the edge of the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man. A beautiful country, if you could survive it. Most could not. The ranch was called the Rafter C, a small operation, 200 acres of dry graze, a creek that ran through May and went to nothing by July, a house her husband had built with his own hands, a barn that still smelled of new timber. She had planted a vegetable patch on the south side of the house the first spring they were there. The tomatoes had come in good. She had been proud of those tomatoes. She was thinking, when those 4 horses turned in off the road and came up the track, that she would need to water the patch before dark. The horses drove that thought out of her head. Now, partner, if you're new to this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. We put out stories like this every single week, tales of the frontier that this country has half forgotten. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments, we love to know. Now let's go back to the Rafter C. Let's go back to Nora Calloway standing in that doorway. She had been at the washboard when she heard them. She went to the window first, the way a cautious person does. Looked through the glass, counted horses, counted men. 4 horses, 5 men, 4 riding, 1 already on the ground and moving toward her porch like he owned it. She recognized the lean of him. She did not know the man, but she knew the type. That was enough. She did not panic. Nora Fenn had not been raised to panic. She crossed to the kitchen, dried her hands on her apron, and took the rifle down from the wall pegs. It was a Winchester 1873, lever action, a plain finished carbine that her father had given her when she turned 16. She had put 1,000 rounds through that rifle. She knew its pull, its cant, the particular way it seated against her shoulder. She loaded it without looking at her hands, the way a person does a thing they have done 1,000 times. Then she walked to the front door and opened it. The man on the porch stopped at the sound of the door. He was thin, dark-haired, dressed in town clothes that had seen trail dust, a man who worked a desk but didn't mind being sent out when a desk didn't get the job done. His name was Ferris. He worked for a man named Holcomb, and Holcomb was the kind of man who used other men's labor to make himself enormous. Mrs. Calloway, Ferris said. He took his hat off. Polite. You alone out here? Nora looked at him. Then she looked at the 4 men behind him. 2 still mounted, 2 on the ground. She looked at the foreclosure document he was already pulling from his coat pocket. Appears so, she said. Your husband's still away? He'll be back when he's back, she said. Ferris nodded like she'd said something reasonable. Thing is, ma'am, we're going to need a signature on this document today. Mr. Holcomb's been patient, 6 months patient, but the note on this property came due last Tuesday, and it did not get paid. And Mr. Holcomb's attorney says that entitles him to begin proceedings. I'm just here to serve the notice and collect either a payment or a signature. He held the paper out. Might be simpler if you just signed. Save your husband the trouble of riding back to an argument he can't win. Nora didn't reach for the paper. Ferris sighed. He put his hat back on. He looked at the rifle in her hands, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not quite. Recalculation. Ma'am, I've got 4 men with me. I don't want this to be unpleasant. But I need one or the other. The paper or the payment. No one's riding to save you, one of the mounted men called from the yard. He had a lazy voice, the kind that enjoyed its own entertainment. His name was Ruck, and he had a broad face and small eyes, and he had been saying rude things out of his mouth his whole life without anything bad happening to him as a result of it, which had given him a false impression of the world. "No one's coming. You're alone out here, sweetheart. Might as well make it easy." Nora turned her eyes to Ruck. "I know," she said. She said it the way a woman says something she has already settled, soft, flat, the quiet of a person who has already done the math and knows where it lands. Ruck stopped smiling. The thing about Nora Calloway, which the men on her property did not know, was this. She had grown up on a homestead a hard day's ride from the nearest town, and her father had been away driving cattle 3 months out of every 4, and what he had given his daughter before he left those first times was not a doll or a locket, but a rifle and a lesson. You are alone out here. The world knows it. The world is not always kind to women alone, so you learn to take care of yourself, or you don't take care of yourself. Those are the options. Nora had learned. She had put down her first coyote at 10, in the dark, at 200 yards, by starlight and patience. She had been shooting ever since. Her father used to say she had a gift for distance and a gift for stillness, and those two things together made her something particular. Her husband, when she'd told him about the coyotes the first time, the starlight and the 200 yards, had looked at her with a kind of quiet admiration that had nothing to do with being impressed and everything to do with recognition. Like he was seeing something he understood. She had loved him for that look. He was away now, 2 days north. A cattle drive, a fence dispute, something that required his presence. He had kissed her at dawn and ridden out, and she had not minded because Nora Calloway did not require a husband standing between her and the world. She required a partner, and she had one, and he would be back when he came back. She just needed the next few hours to go her way. "Mr. Ferris," she said, keeping her eyes on Ruck a moment longer before she turned back, "I'm going to ask you and your men to get off my property. You can leave the paper on the porch rail if you want. My husband will read it when he gets back. But you are going to get back on those horses and ride out, and that is going to happen in the next 60 seconds. Ferris looked at the rifle. He looked at her hands on it. "Mrs. Calloway, I don't think you want to." 50 seconds, Nora said. Now, the man who would become a problem, the one nobody watched because nobody watched the quiet ones, his name was Creed. He was the third man, the one still on the ground near the barn door, and he had not said a word since they arrived. He had brown eyes that went nowhere, and a stillness about him that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with the habit of watching. He had worked for Holcomb for 4 years. He was the one who got things done when talking was finished. Creed looked at Nora, looked at the angle of the sun, the distance from his position to the porch, the cover between them. He began to move. He made it 3 steps. The rifle cracked. The shot went into the dirt 6 inches in front of his left boot, and the dust puffed up, and Creed stopped as though he had walked into an invisible wall. In the silence that followed, Nora worked the lever, smooth, fast, the click of the mechanism sharp in the afternoon air. "Next one won't be at your feet," she said. Nobody moved. Ferris had gone very still. The 2 mounted riders looked at each other. Ruck had stopped looking lazy. Creed stood in the yard with the dust still settling around his boot, and looked at the woman in the doorway for a long moment. "She'll do it," he said. He said it without particular emotion, the way a man states a weather fact. He turned and walked back toward his horse. Ferris put the foreclosure paper back inside his coat. He did it slowly, careful not to make any movement that could be misread. "We'll be back," he said. "I know that too," Nora said. They rode out. She stood in the doorway and watched them go until they were small against the scrub hills, and then smaller, and then gone. And then she walked inside and set the rifle against the table and sat down, because her knees had decided they were done being steady now that the moment had passed. She sat there a while. Then she got up and went to the stove and put on coffee, because that was a thing to do with your hands when your heart was still running fast. Now, folks, that is where I am going to ask you to do something for me. If you don't mind, hit that subscribe button for me, down below. We put out Frontier stories every week, and I do not want you to miss a single one. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening tonight? What time is it where you are? I love to know. Some of you write in from places that would have surprised those old-timers considerably. Now let's talk about what Nora Calloway was up against, and about the man who was riding back toward her without knowing any of this had happened yet. Abel Holcomb had come to New Mexico Territory in 1882, with money behind him, Eastern money, investor money, the kind of money that didn't smell like cattle or sweat, but still wanted a piece of the land. He had started small, a leased-range operation on the eastern bench country. But small had not been what he wanted, and he had the particular patience of a man who plans in years rather than seasons. By 1887 he had acquired, through purchase, through legal pressure, through offers that weren't quite offers, 14 ranches in the Jornada corridor. He wanted water. That was the simple truth beneath the complicated paperwork. The creek that ran through the Rafter Sea's north quarter was one of 3 reliable water sources in the area, and whoever controlled those 3 sources controlled the grazing for 100 square miles. Holcomb was not a violent man by preference. He was a transactional man. He preferred to buy what he wanted, and when buying didn't work, he preferred to use legal instruments, notes, liens, foreclosure proceedings, and when those didn't work fast enough, he sent Ferris. And when Ferris came back, having failed, which had not happened to him before in 14 acquisitions, he would need to decide what came next. He sat in his office in Santa Fe that evening, Ferris across the desk from him, and he listened to the account of what had happened at the Rafter Sea. "She fired on you," he said. "Into the dirt," warning shot. "At Creed." Ferris nodded. Holcomb was quiet a moment, and Creed turned around. Creed said she'd do it. Ferris paused. I think he was right. Holcomb leaned back. He had the Calloway deed research on his desk, the land survey, the title, the original note. He had the background information on the property, on the note holder, on the husband. He had been thorough. He was always thorough. "Tell me about the husband again," he said. "What did you find?" "Name's Cole Calloway. Came up from Texas sometime around 84. Runs cattle, a small herd. No legal record in New Mexico, no significant history here. And before 84, Ferris had not dug before 1884. He had not thought he needed to. "I don't know," he said. Holcomb looked at him. Then he looked at the papers on his desk. Something was sitting at the back of his mind. A cold weight, the feeling a man gets when he senses he has missed something important. "Find out," he said, "before we go back there." He would not find out in time. Cole Calloway had ridden 2 days north for a legitimate reason. There was a fence dispute on a neighbor's property that needed a steady man present, and he had been thinking about getting back to Nora for the last 12 hours of the return ride. Not because he was worried, because he missed her. That was the simple fact of it. He had been married 2 years, and he still missed her when he was away from her, and he had begun to think he always would. He was 31 years old, lean and dark, with hands that showed work and eyes that showed patience, the particular patience of a man who has learned to wait for the right moment, because the cost of moving too soon is something he has paid before. He wore a plain coat and a hat that had seen better days, and a single revolver on his hip, the ordinary gun, the traveling gun. The guns he kept for other purposes were on a shelf in the bedroom of the Rafter Sea, under a folded blanket, and he had not worn them in 2 years. He had promised Nora he would try to be done with that life, and he had meant it. He had not thought the life would come looking for them. He saw the tracks when he came in off the road. 5 sets of hoof prints in the soft dirt of the track, 4 of them pointing in, all 5 pointing back out. He counted them twice, 5 horses in, 5 horses out. He looked at the sky, reading what time of day they would have arrived, and he put his heels to his horse. The horse was named River. River was a good horse. River felt the change in his rider and came up to a canter without being asked. Nora was in the kitchen when she heard him come into the yard, and she went to the door, and he was already off the horse, reading the yard, reading the porch, reading the evidence of what had been there. 5 horses, he said, looking up at her. 4 men and a paper server, she said. Holcomb's men, they're trying to foreclose on the note. Cole came up onto the porch. He looked at her the way he always looked at her first, checking, making sure she was all right. She saw him do it and she put her hand on his arm. "I'm fine," she said. Fired a warning shot at one of them. They left. He looked at the drift of dust still visible on the yard surface, settling slowly. Then he looked at her. "You fired a warning shot," he said. "Into the dirt." 6 inches from his boot. A silence. Cole looked at the yard again, then back at her face, and something moved behind his eyes. Not quite a smile, not quite pride. Something that encompassed both of those things and went a little further. "Your father raised you right," he said. "I know that," she said. "But they'll be back." Cole nodded. He had been calculating since he turned in off the road. "Holcomb," he said. "I've heard the name. He's been buying up the corridor. He wants the creek, the water rights. How much do we owe on the note?" $240. It came due Tuesday. He was quiet. $240 was not a sum that sat in the strong box, not with the spring herd not yet moved. He turned and looked at the range to the south, the dry hills, the scrub oak, the thin line of cottonwoods where the creek bent. "All right," he said. "Let me think about this." They went inside. Nora poured him coffee and he sat at the table and drank it and thought, and she sat across from him and watched him think. And she had learned in 2 years that when he got this particular look, still, internal, like he was reading something written a long way away, it was better to let him read. After a while he said, "They're going to come back with more men. I know. Holcomb doesn't need the money. He wants the property. So he'll keep applying pressure until he gets a signature or until something changes the calculation." "So we changed the calculation," Nora said. Cole looked at her. "That's right. What does that mean?" He set down his cup. He was quiet another moment. "It means," he said slowly, "that I am going to have to tell you something I have not told you. Not all of it. Some of it you've guessed, I think." She had. She had known since early in their courtship that there was a weight to her husband that did not come from ordinary life. She had known from the way he read a room when he entered it, from the way his eyes went first to exits and then to hands, from the particular economy of his movements that said a man who knew precisely what his body could do and had reason to know it. She had not pressed. She had married him for who he was in front of her, and that man was good and careful and genuinely kind, and she had loved him for all of it. "Tell me," she said. Cole Calloway had not always been called Cole Calloway. The name was his mother's name, her family name, and he had taken it up when he came to New Mexico because he had wanted a new beginning, and the name he'd been known by before was a name that drew attention he was no longer interested in. Before 1884, he had spent 7 years riding out of Texas and into the territories on work he was not proud of, doing things that needed doing in a hard country, doing them more efficiently than most men could manage. He had been 21 when he started and 28 when he stopped. In those 7 years his name had gotten around, the way names do in a country where information travels on the mouths of men who've been frightened. He had never gone looking for a reputation. It had just accumulated the way debt accumulates, quiet in the background, adding up until the weight of it became hard to ignore. The last job he had taken, before he was done, had been in West Texas, A land dispute, a family that was being squeezed off ground their grandfather had broken. He had ridden in, and he had settled it, and he had not enjoyed it. And afterward he had sat beside a creek for a long time thinking about what kind of life a man could build if he was willing to go somewhere new and keep his hands out of things that weren't his business. He had ridden north. He had found the Jornada country. He had built a house. He had met Nora at a church social in the spring of 1885, which would have surprised the people who knew his earlier name considerably. She had been talking to a woman about soil acidity and tomato yields, and she had used words like precise, and she had looked at Cole once across the room and looked away without either interest or dismissal, the look of a woman who formed her opinions slowly and held them firmly. And he had introduced himself that evening, and she had said, "I know who you are." He had gone cold. She had said, "You're the man who helped the Garcias keep their land." And he had understood she meant the West Texas job, not the name. And he had thought, "This one sees what she looks at." They had married 6 months later. He did not tell Nora all of it. He told her enough. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he was done, she was quiet a moment, and he watched her face. And what he saw there was not the thing he had sometimes feared. Not shock, not revision, not the look of a woman reconsidering what she had married. What he saw was the face of a woman processing information, making calculations, the same face she had when she was figuring something practical. "So," she said at last, "when Holcomb finds out who you are, he'll change the calculation," Cole said. "Or he'll find men who don't scare easily, which is its own problem. How many men like that exist? Not as many as you'd think," Cole said. "But enough. Then we go to him," Nora said. "Before he has time to find them, we go to Holcomb directly, and we change the terms." He looked at her. "You're not wrong," he said. "I know I'm not wrong." She stood up and went to the stove and refilled his cup. "I'll take the high ground. There's a rise on the south side of his property I can read from the road. I've seen it twice riding into Santa Fe. If you go to the front, I'll be on that rise with a Winchester. You go in with 2 Colts. I'm at the overwatch." He counts the arithmetic. Then it's a conversation. Cole was very still. "You've thought about this before," he said. "I've thought about what I would do if someone tried to take this ranch," she said. "Yes." He turned that over. 2 years of marriage, and he still found new runes in her. She had never told him she'd planned for this. She had simply planned for it, the way a capable person plans for weather, not hoping it won't come, but knowing what they'll do when it does. "Distance from the rise to the front of the house," he said, 170, maybe 75 yards. "Good sightline to the yard. I was measuring when I went through on the Santa Fe Road last March. Juniper cover on the approach. Morning light would be at our backs if we go before 8. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he got up and went to the bedroom and lifted the folded blanket from the shelf. The 2 Colts were underneath. He hadn't looked at them in 8 months. He picked them up one at a time, checked their action, held each one until the weight was familiar again, and set them on the table. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he set down and thought he was done with. "Some days," he said, "require the right instrument." Nora took the Winchester down from the wall pegs. She loaded it in the lamplight, slow and methodical, the way she always did. 12 rounds in the magazine. 2 boxes more in the saddlebag. She was thinking about wind, about the juniper cover, about sight picture. She was not afraid. That was the thing about Nora Calloway. She was not reckless, and she was not fearless, but when she had made a plan she believed in, the fear had nothing to work with. She blew out the lamp. Outside the window the stars were sharp over the scrub hills, and the Rafter sea was quiet and dark. "Get some sleep," she said. "We leave before first light." They rode out before first light before Holcomb could dispatch anyone else to the Rafter sea. Nora had the Winchester across her saddle. Cole had the Colts on his hips, under a coat, and he rode with the particular stillness of a man who has remembered something about himself. They knew where Holcomb's main property was. Everyone in the corridor knew. A large stone house on the north road into Santa Fe, a working ranch behind it, corrals, outbuildings, 5 or 6 men usually visible. A place built to say something. Holcomb liked to say things with buildings. Cole stopped half a mile out and looked at the rise Nora had described. It was good ground, a long slope of broken rock and scrub juniper that climbed above the main house and outbuildings and gave a clean line of sight to the front approach. 170 yards, maybe 180. Clean air, morning light coming from the east at the shooter's back. "That's good ground," he said. "I know," Nora said. He looked at her. He had looked at her like this a few times in their marriage, the look of a man who had expected to be the capable one, and was finding the distribution was more interesting than that. "Don't let it get to the point where I need to use it," he said. "That's the plan," she said. She rode the long way around through the scrub, taking her time, keeping below the ridge until she could come up the back side of the rise without being seen from the house. Cole gave her 20 minutes. Then he rode straight up the front road. He came through the gate at a walk. There were 3 men in the yard. Holcomb's ranch hands. Not Ferris. Not Creed. They saw him, and they straightened up and they looked at his coat and his hands, and they had the good sense to be still. "Holcomb," Cole said. "I'd like a word." Holcomb came to the porch himself, which meant he had been watching from a window. He was a big man going soft, well-dressed with the look of someone who spent his life in rooms where he was in charge. He looked at Cole. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I expected your wife." "My wife is otherwise occupied," Cole said. There was a long pause. Holcomb was looking at the Colts under the coat, visible now, the ivory handles showing. He was doing arithmetic. "You've come to discuss the note," Holcomb said. "I've come to discuss the note," Cole said, "and the 24 hours you've got to decide you don't want the Rafter see anymore." Holcomb looked at him. "That's not a negotiating position. That's a threat." "It's a statement of timeline," Cole said. "You've been acquiring ranches in this corridor for 5 years. You've done it clean, mostly. Offers, legal filings, patience. I understand the business. But the Rafter C is not for sale, and it is not going to foreclose. So the question is whether you want to keep pressing until something bad happens to one of your men, or whether we settle this another way." Holcomb's eyes went to the yard, went to his men, went back to Cole. "What other way?" he said. "There's a quarter section on the south boundary, dry ground, no water, no grazing. We own it free and clear. You want water rights on this corridor, there's an easement through that quarter that would get you access to the lower aquifer for your west range. It would be worth more to you long-term than the Rafter Seas Creek. Cole, let that sit. I'll deed you the easement for the note. 24 hours. The silence stretched. Holcomb was a transactional man. That was his core. He did math, always. He was doing it now. The easement, the aquifer, the long-range value, versus the cost of pushing further against a man who was standing very still in his yard with 2 Colts, and the particular patience of a man who knows what he's about. Then one of the ranch hands at the far end of the corral made a small movement. He was looking up, not at Cole, up and to the right, toward the scrub ridge that climbed above the south side of the property. He was shielding his eyes against the morning light. Up on the ridge, Nora Calloway had settled into the juniper with the Winchester seated against her shoulder, and the scope of the morning light clean behind her. She was 175 yards out. She had held targets at 200 yards since she was 16. She was not thinking about distance. She was thinking about stillness. And she was very still. One of the ranch hands said quietly, "There's a rifle on that ridge." Nobody moved. Holcomb looked at Cole. Cole looked at Holcomb. "My wife," Cole said, "is a better shot than I am. In the interests of honesty, I thought you should know that." Holcomb was quiet for a long moment. He was a man who could read a room, and what this room said was that the arithmetic had changed substantially from what he had believed it to be when he sent Ferris out yesterday morning. He had done his research on Cole Calloway since Ferris had come back. He had spent last night finding out what was under that name. What he had found had not made him comfortable. He had not done any research on the woman on the ridge. He was seeing very clearly that this had been an error in methodology. "The easement," he said. "For the note." Cole said, "Deed recorded in Santa Fe. Note canceled." "Today?" Another silence. Holcomb let out a long breath that wasn't quite a sigh. "Your attorney or mine?" he said. "Mine," Cole said. "I'll have the paperwork here by 2:00. They settled it in Holcomb's front room, with Ferris watching from the doorway and Creed outside in the yard looking up at the ridge where Nora was and thinking his private thoughts about methodology. The deed for the easement was signed over. The note was marked canceled. 2 documents, 2 signatures, a notary brought in from town who stamped what he was told to stamp without asking about the rifle on the ridge. Cole Calloway rode out of Abel Holcomb's property at 10:30 in the morning, with the canceled note in his coat pocket and the Colts still on his hips, and the thought that this was going to need to be the last time. He met Nora coming down off the ridge. She had the Winchester across her saddle, and her hat was pushed back and the morning light was on her face. And she was looking at him the way she looked at him when she was waiting to hear how something had gone. "Notes canceled," he said. "Easement for the water." Nora nodded. "Did he argue?" "He thought about it," Cole said. Then he did the math. She rode beside him a moment in quiet. The horses moved easy on the road south, and the sky was big and blue above the scrub country, and there was no sound except hoofbeats and the creak of saddle leather. "He called you, your wife, on the porch," Cole said. "Did he?" "He'd found out who I am by then. He still looked at the ridge, not at me when the rifle showed." Nora was quiet. "He did his research on the man," she said. "And not on the woman," Cole said. "That's right." A pause. "Are you going to keep telling people that?" Nora asked. "I'm going to keep finding it true," Cole said. She looked at him. He was watching the road ahead, but there was something quiet and certain in his expression, the look of a man who had been given something he had not expected and had understood its value immediately. "The tomatoes need water," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll get to it when we're home." They rode south through the scrub oak and the dry hills, 2 people on 2 horses under the wide New Mexico sky, and the note was canceled, and the ranch was theirs, and the world had remembered what it cost to underestimate a quiet woman in a doorway. They were home before noon now. "Friends, I want you to sit with that a minute before you ride on. There's a thing this country did in those years, that it did so often it almost stopped being a thing people noticed. It measured a man by his gun and his reputation and his past and his legend. It kept books on what men had done and who they had bested and where they had ridden and what they had survived. It kept those books carefully. It did its homework on men, and it almost never did its homework on women. The Nora Calloway of that world, the woman who had been shooting coyotes in the dark since she was 10 years old, who had grown up in a country that asked her to be capable or be consumed, that woman was invisible to the men who came with their papers and their riders and their certainties. She was background. She was context. She was the wife. "Partner, I have been telling stories about this frontier for a long time, and I will tell you that the ones who underestimated the women, the ones who looked past them, who did the research on the man and never on the woman at the door, they were almost always wrong. Not sometimes. Almost always. There's a lesson in that. I won't dress it up too fine. The lesson is just this. The world has a way of putting capable people in quiet places and assuming they'll stay quiet. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they pick up a Winchester and settle into a ridge at 175 yards. and wait for the arithmetic to change. And the arithmetic always changes. Now, if you made it this far, my friend, I'd be grateful if you'd hit the like button and subscribe down below. Tell me in the comments what you thought of Nora tonight. I have a feeling she's the kind of character you're going to remember for a while. And while you're there, where are you watching from tonight? What time is it where you are? Those comments mean the world to me. Until our trails cross again, partner, keep your powder dry and your soul honest. I'll see you next time.